Assalamu alaikum dear researcher, and welcome to the research methodology class. Today we are going to discuss understanding research philosophy or the philosophical underpinnings of business and management research. The term research philosophy refers to a system of beliefs and assumptions about the development of the knowledge. Although it may sound very obvious, but when you are going to start your research, you are going to develop knowledge in a particular field. Whether you are consciously aware of it or you are not, at every stage of research, you will make a number of assumptions. Now, these assumptions are very important because they refer to many different aspects of the knowledge that you are going to create. For example, they can be ontological assumptions, what is the reality, epistemological assumptions, what is the human knowledge, and axiological assumptions that how your values influence your research process. As you will learn further in your course, your research philosophy will guide how you are going to carry out your further research. For example, a researcher's research philosophy might determine whether they are going to use a quantitative survey to collect data in their research or they are going to conduct a qualitative interviews. So it is important that establishing a research philosophy ensures that the approach that you are going to opt for your research is coherent and suitable for the research question or the research problem that you are going to work upon. So after you have determined your research topic and research problem, the best way is to start with the reflexive process as shown in the diagram. You begin asking yourself questions about your research beliefs and your research assumptions, as we are going to see in the next slides. Then you will familiarize yourself with the major research philosophies which are important in the business and the business and management field. And this dual course of action will help you set the motion the development of your research design. And sometimes your research design can also determine your research philosophy and can also impact your beliefs and assumptions about the research. So why research philosophy is important? Because it aligns your research design with assumption about reality and knowledge. Before we proceed further, it is important to understand that there is no one best research philosophy. In fact, within the field of management, even different philosophers or different researchers do not agree about one best philosophy. This is because the field of business and management has emerged, or it is composed of various disciplines like from social sciences. It is emerged from sociology, psychology, economics. It also have a blend of natural sciences, applied sciences, humanities, and obviously organizational practices are very important guidelines which tells us about how this field is developed. So when we are talking about a research philosophy, it is important that it guides us for the further processes of a research design. For example, what is the best method for data collection for the type of research that we are going to conduct? It helps us to ensure that our research findings are credible and reliable. It is also the outermost part of the research onion, as we're going to see in the next slide, because as we proceed further, our research philosophy will guideline that what is the next step that we're going to opt within our research onion. And as we have seen our previous slide, it is always related, the research philosophy is always related to the values and assumptions that we are going to make about the reality and our research design. So as you can see in this famous research onion, the philosophy of the research is the outermost layer, which obviously determines what are we going to opt for in our next layers of the onion. It starts with the philosophy, then approaches to theory development, then what are the methodological choices, what are the research strategies, what is the importance of time horizon in research, and what procedure and techniques we are going to select for different aspect of the research, carrying out research, for example, the sample selection, the data collection, the analysis, and the ethical aspect of the research. Before we proceed further to discuss the research philosophies, we should be able to distinguish between them. And the most important way to distinguish between these different types of research philosophy is the philosophical beliefs and assumptions, that is the ontology. What is the nature of the reality? It is concerned with assumptions about what exists in the world. Is it objective reality, or the reality is something that is perceived or is constructed? Then second assumption is epistemology, that what is the nature of the knowledge or how we can define knowledge. It deals with how knowledge is obtained and what actually counts as a valid knowledge for different people. And the third or the last philosophical belief is axiology, that is what is the role of values in research, how values determines that what type of research we are going to carry out, how it influence our research process. So as we defined earlier, ontology refers to the assumption about the nature of reality. The ontology therefore determines how you see the world, especially in the field of business and management, and what is going to be your choice of the research for your research project. Now we can explain this with different examples. A very valid example that is given in our text is that for a long time business and management scholars had a specific assumption that the resistance to change within the organization can be a very damaging thing. It is not good, it should be eliminated at all cost. They argued that it is a kind of organization misbehavior, and whenever the change programs are resisted, people who are actually resisting is doing wrong. So the focus of the research was that the resistance to the change should be eliminated at all cost. Now, very recently, some researchers have started to view that this concept is wrong actually, because they say that those who are resisting is basically they are benefiting the organization by addressing some problematic aspect of the change programs. So as we can see that there are certain ontological assumptions that humans carry out for a long time, and then they realize that no, this the reality can be different as they have assumed for a long time, and this is what actually shapes the new paradigms in research. This is what carries forward the new knowledge, because as the reality or the assumption about the reality changes, people discover new things, people develop new policies, people develop new management styles, and this is why ontology is very important aspect whenever we are thinking about a new research problem. As with all philosophical assumptions, the two extremes of these assumptions is objectivism, which says that reality exists independent of human thoughts, and subjectivism, which says that reality is constructed through social interaction. And we're going to discuss this objectivism and subjectivism later on as well. Now, the second philosophical assumption is epistemological assumption, which is basically what constitutes a valid and acceptable knowledge in a particular field. It refers to the assumption about knowledge, what constitutes acceptable, valid, and legitimate knowledge, and how we can communicate knowledge to others. Now, the key question is, how do we know what we know? For example, as we know that business and management field is multidisciplinary, now the knowledge can range from numerical data to textual data to visual data. We can have facts that can be in the form of narratives, stories. So all can be considered a legitimate knowledge. Now different business and management researchers adopt different epistemological assumptions in their research. For instance, you can also see some research which are based upon some archival data, that is from some written books, previous historical books, from autobiographical accounts, from the narratives, even from the films and movies. So variety of epistemology gives you a large choice of what methods to adopt. And as we will see in research philosophies, for example, positivist, they say that the knowledge is something that is discoverable through observable facts. On the other hand, those who are interpretivism, or those follow the interpretivism, they focus on understanding the subjective meaning of the knowledge. So this epistemological assumptions has a great deal or a great effect on your research design. The third and the last philosophical assumption is the axiological assumptions. Axiology is the study of values and ethics in research. As we can see that different communities or different cultures have different values. So the key question in this philosophy is, should the research be free of value, or value should play an important role when we are talking about conducting a research? Now there are some philosophers who argues that our values are the guiding reasons for all human actions, and it is inevitable that you will incorporate your values doing the research. So it is crucially important that you explicitly recognize and reflect upon these values when you're writing your research. On the other hand, there are some researchers specifically who are more towards the positivist approach. They say that your research should be value free. They say the researcher should design the research in such a manner that it minimizes the researcher bias. Now, in practice, your research philosophy is a reflection of your values. So is the choice of your data collection procedure. For instance, you decide to collect data using a survey that is a well formulated survey composed of close ended questions, which means that when you are collecting data, you are not going to play any or you're not going to interfere in the data collection method, and you basically is of belief that your research should be value free. On the other hand, if you are conducting data through personal interaction, through interviews or face-to-face interviews, so it means that you are actually putting in your own values, because when you're asking questions, there are some tone, there is some cues that you are providing during that interview, which means that you are actually adding your values. And when you are cross-questioning your respondents, it means that you are adding your values in the research. So both these assumptions are actually part of your research design. So this slide actually compares the philosophical assumptions of ontology, epistemology, and axiology on two extreme dimensions of objectivism and subjectivism. So if it's ontology, the question that we are asking is, what is the nature of reality and what's the world like? How you explain the reality? In objectivism, it's more of a real, externally observed. There's one true reality, that is universalism. Things are important, order is important. And when we go to the extreme of subjectivism, it is actually something that is decided by the culture, the relationships, the social constructions. There are multiple realities, multiple meanings. We can give different meanings to one observable item. The chaos is actually something that is occurring in the universe, because things can be explained in different ways. If we are talking about epistemology, that is how can we know about what we know, how are the acceptable knowledge in a different field, what constitute a good quality data. If we are talking about objectivism, it means that it is basically something of a scientific facts, that is proven scientific facts. The data should be in the base of number of observable phenomena. The generalization should be such that it's like a law. And if it's subjectivism, so it's more like tilted towards arts and humanities. Opinions are important, written and spoken words are important with multiple meanings. You can also give meanings to something. You can find the hidden meanings within the text. You can find hidden meanings within the person's the way they are speaking. You can find hidden meanings with their facial expressions, etc. If we are talking about axiology, so what is the role of value in the research? That is the question that axiology asks. So the balance is, should we try to morally be neutral when we do research, or should we let our values affect our research? How should we deal with the values of research participants? That's also important question. The objectivist says that our research should be value free. We should be detached with the research process, so the process should be defined. And as we will see further in hypothetical deductive research approach, that is mostly based upon axiology, we try to detach ourselves from the research process. Whereas in the subjectivist philosophy, we say that our research is always value bound. We cannot separate ourselves from the research, and it's more of a reflexive procedure. Our values are an integral part of our research process. Before we proceed further to discuss different type of research philosophies which are based upon the research assumptions that we have discussed earlier, It's important to understand research paradigms as well, because research paradigms also helps us explain different type of research philosophies and why one philosophy is different from another. So a research paradigm is a set of fundamental beliefs about how the world operates. As you can see in this 2 by 2 matrix, that represents four research paradigms based on two dimensions: a subjectivist and objectivist, as we have discussed earlier, and regulation and radical change. So what are subjectivists? Subjectivists focus on the belief that reality is socially constructed through interactions and perceptions. It emphasizes understanding the world from the perspective of an individual or a group or a culture. On the other hand, objectivist assumes that reality exists independently of our perception and can only be understood through observable or measurable facts, something that we can see with our senses. The regulation and radical change are two dimensions that actually leads to four paradigms. Regulation focuses on maintaining order, status quo, stability within the existing structure, whereas the radical change paradigm, it focuses on a transformative change, questioning the existing structure, challenging something that's happening, seeking fundamental shifts in society or organizations, for instance, like feminism, for instance, like minority rights, political rights, etc. So this leads to four paradigms. The first paradigm that is based upon subjectivist and regulation is interpretive. It focuses on understanding how people make sense of their world through experiences and interaction. It assumes that social reality is created through shared meanings and cultural context. For example, if you are going to conduct a study on how employees interpret organization culture within a company, that can be an interpretive paradigm. Functionalists are composed of objectivist and regulation. It emphasizes rational explanation and seeks to understand how social systems function to maintain order. So in this kind of research, we are identifying patterns, regularities, and relationship between different elements within an organization or society. For example, you're doing a research that analyzes the efficiency of organizational process to improve productivity. Then we have a radical humanist, that is subjectivist, and radical change, that is on the top right corner. So this seeks to challenge and change the way people actually view their social reality. It emphasizes different ideologies in shaping a social structure. For example, you are interested to study on how individuals perceive oppression within an organizational structure and what is important of empowerment in that scenario. And radical structurists are actually combining the objectivist with a radical change. So it focuses on structural aspect of society or organization that create and maintain power imbalances. So it aims to analyze and transform those structures in a more objective way. For example, you examine a research on how economic structure leads to inequality and suggests systematic change. So when we are talking about economic structure, it means we are doing objective research because we are going to gather data that is more in a numerical form. So either research paradigms and research philosophies may seem somewhat confusing. They do have some differences, as we have already discussed before. But the bottom line is that the research paradigms, the research philosophies, and research methodologies are all interconnected. It all depends upon the type of the research problem that you investigated, and actually both the research paradigms or research paradigms actually influence the research philosophies, which actually influences the research methodology. So all the discussion about research assumptions, that is entomology, epistemology, axiology, and research paradigms, leads to the discussion of five major philosophies in business and management. That is positivism, which focuses on observable reality, aims to produce generalizable result. Critical realism, that seeks to understand underlying structures behind observed phenomena. Interpretivism, that focuses on subjective experiences and multiple realities. Postmodernism, that actually challenges established truths and power structures. And pragmatism, that focuses on practical solution and uses a mixed method approach. So let's discuss these philosophies one by one. Whenever the word positivism comes to your mind, you should also have quantitative research in consideration, because positivism is a philosophy that asserts that the only authentic knowledge is that which is based on actual observable phenomena, and that knowledge can be verified through empirical evidence. So it relates to the philosophical stance of the natural scientist and entails working with an observable social reality to produce something that is law-like generalization. So in this particular aspect, the ontology of positivism is reality is external, it is independent, and there is one true reality, as we have seen earlier, that is a universal reality, and things are actually ordered. The epistemological assumption is that its scientific method is going to be used, observable and measurable facts are going to be used, numbers are going to be used, causal explanation and predictions are going to be used. It's a value free research, which means axiology is value free. The interference of researcher is minimal. The researcher is neutral and independent, and the researcher tries to maintain as much as possible objective stance. The typical method that is used for this kind of research is a deductive research, highly structured, and as we will see in our subsequent chapters, that hypothetical deductive research approach is what is most relevant to the positivist research. Mostly it's quantitative method of analysis with some kind of statistical analysis and a range of data that is analyzed. For example, if you're doing a research on studying the impact of training programs on employee productivity and you're using a survey, it means that you're going to use a positivist philosophy of research. Just like positivists, critical realists also realize the importance of observable events, but they rely on focusing on understanding the deeper meaning of those events. So it basically combines the realist ontology, that belief that reality is independent of human perception, with a recognition that our understanding of this reality is always socially mediated and fallible. So the most important consideration for critical realist is that there is a structured and layered ontology that is crucial, and there is some process that is going on behind the actual reality. So this is why it is different from the positivist approach. If we talk about the assumptions of research for a critical realist, there is a layered reality that we call a stratified reality, because the data can be empirical, actual and real, external, independent, objective structure, but there are some causal mechanisms that actually explains that epistemology. And why is that? Because what we observed is only the something that is obvious, and there is something that behind. The ontology. The epistemology is that the knowledge is actually relative. Facts are something that are actually composed of social experiences, historical experiences that actually shapes up the knowledge, and there is actually some kind of the bias, because unlike positivist critical realism realize that the research is value laden. It is actually they acknowledges that human beings are biased, and all the experiences are formed by the cultural experiences, the upbringing, the way we perceive things. However, researchers try to minimize these biases and errors as much as possible when they are carrying out research using critical realism. The method of research that is mostly used is retroductive, in-depth historical analysis of data. There are different methods, as we will see in our subsequent chapters, that can lead to critical realism. An example of research in critical realism is that you are doing a study that investigates the underlying social and economic factors that contribute to workplace inequality, and you can use both qualitative and quantitative data to actually verify your research. So if I want to summarize this, critical realism claims that there are two steps to understanding the world. First, there is a data that we get from our sensations and events that we experience. Second, there is a mental processing that goes on sometimes after the experience, which actually we reason backwards from our experiences and create a meaning of that. Interpretivism is actually another name for the qualitative research. It's totally subjective in nature. Interpretism philosophy is a belief that reality is socially constructed, it is totally subjective, and that understanding human behaviors requires an exploration of how people perceive and interpret their world. So there can be a subjective reality, that is the key characteristic of this particular research. Interpretivists focus on understanding the meaning and context of the human experience from the perspective of what their experience is. It's a qualitative research method mostly used. It involves qualitative methods like interviews, focus groups, ethnographic analysis, narratives to explore complex social phenomena. The important is to understand the context. So the emphasis on understanding the context and meaning of individual, or the meaning individual attached to these experiences, rather than trying to generalize the findings as we do in a post or in a positivist research. So an example would be a study exploring how employees perceive and experiences organizational change through in-depth interviews, or we can have different types of observations to understand the phenomena. Postmodernism is another type of philosophy that challenges the positivist approach. In this philosophy, there is no objective reality, but everything is relative. It focuses on plurality of perspective, the fluidity of meanings, and the socially constructed nature of knowledge. So it actually says that there is no single overarching reality. It challenges the dominant narratives actually, and seeks to uncover the hidden power relationship. So the basic purpose of postmodernist approach is deconstruction of established narratives and concept, and reveal underlying assumptions, biases, and power dynamics. So they go a step ahead than interpretism, because they critique not only critique positivism and objectivism, but actually they take out the hidden meanings which are actually not obvious in some kind of research. The other name for postmodernism is transformative philosophy. The key characteristic is reality is complex and shaped by power dynamics. Knowledge is relative and shaped by cultural contexts. It emphasizes reflexivity and acknowledges the role of power in research. So, if you are analyzing how media portrays leadership and how it influences the perception of management, you are actually going for postmodernism research. So, the basic difference between postmodernist research and interpretive research is the challenge of the actual dynamics that are prevailing, and taking out a different or meaning that was actually not dominant before, and you are actually giving a different explanation of that some kind of power relation. So postmodernist researcher seeks to expose and question the power relation that sustains the dominant reality. So as a postmodernist researcher, you would challenge the organizational concepts and theories, and you would demonstrate what perspective and realities are excluded, and why people are not pursuing it, what interests they serve, and it's like you are actually going against the popular beliefs, and you are actually doing something that is revolutionary. The pragmatic research philosophy, or as such, I could not say it's an actual research philosophy. It basically it focuses on the practical solution and enjoys the benefits of all different philosophies. So, as a pragmatic researcher, you start with a research problem, and you try to focus on some practical solution that actually your research problem should answers. Then you go to a reflexive process, and then you come out with a type of research methodology that actually suits your uh, research. So a pragmatic researcher can do quantitative research, qualitative research, mixed method research. They can do take up any type of research uh, as it relates to its research problem. So the ontology is reality shaped by the practical consequences of idea. Epistemology is that knowledge is context specific and or action oriented. So in some cases the knowledge would be numerical data. In some cases the knowledge can be narratives or sentences or words or movies. And axiology is that research is value driven, focusing on solving the real world problems. So most of the case studies that we do is actually composed of the pragmatic philosophies. How the paradigms and research philosophies are related to each other. Functionalists are closely related to positivists as they both focus on objectivable, measurable aspects of reality. Interpretive aligns with interpretivism in their focus on subjective experience and social construction, since they are also focusing on regulations and subjective approach. Radical structuralistics are more connected with critical realism because although they are objective, but still they are trying to understand the deep structure and underlying causes. Radical humanists are similar to postmodernism because they are critiquing the dominant ideologies and they are focusing on the change. And pragmatism serves as a flexible approach. It does not relate to a particular paradigm because it draws from multiple paradigms based on what is the most suitable for the research problem. When we are trying to answer a research question, it will involve the use of theory. The theory may or may not be made explicit in the design of the research, although to some extent it will be useful in answering of a research question. Either we are testing a theory or we are building a theory is an important question. So this often leads to us to the two contrasting approaches to the reasoning, that is a deductive approach or an inductive approach. And there can be a third approach that is a mixture of both deductive and inductive, is the abductive approach. In deductive reasoning, which is a top-down approach, the researchers start with a theory or hypothesis and then design research to test it. It moves from the journal to the specific logic. If the premises are true, the conclusion must also be true. So you start with an existing theory or hypothesis, you develop some research question or hypothesis, then you collect some data to test the hypothesis, then you analyze the data to see if it supports or the hypothesis is rejected. So as we can see, this type of research is most closely related to the positivist approach or the objectivist approach. For example, you develop a hypothesis that employees who receive regular feedback from their supervisor will have a higher job satisfaction. So what you can do is you can collect some data with surveys and you can analyze using statistical method. If there is a positive relationship, a regression or correlation, your hypothesis is supported. So deductive reasoning, as we have already discussed, is mostly used in quantitative research where researcher aims to test a hypothesis using some structured method such as an experiment or a survey. On the other hand, inductive reasoning, as we call it, a bottom-up approach where researchers begin with an observation of a specific data, then try to develop some broader generalization or theories using that data. So it moves from specific to the journal. It is more exploratory in nature. So how the process can happen, that we gather data through some observations, some interviews, some case studies as we do in qualitative research. Then we identify some patterns or themes in the data. Then we develop some theories or generalization based on those observed patterns. For example, a researcher conducts in-depth interviews with startup founders to explore how they cope with failures in the early stages of their business. So through coding and analyzing that qualitative data, the researcher finds that and entrepreneurs who use some adaptive thinking and they reframe their failures as learning experiences are more successful. So based on these patterns, the researcher developed a theory that resilience and cognitive framing are the key factors in entrepreneurial success and persistence. Inductive reasoning is commonly used in qualitative research where the goal is to explore new phenomena and develop new theories. So as we can see, it is more closely related to interpretivism research, although critical realism, postmodernism and pragmatism can also be applied to inductive reasoning. Finally, the abductive reasoning, which can be said as a combination of the both. It is about finding the most likely explanation for a set of observation. So it is used when researchers encounter some surprising facts when they are doing their research and they need to create a plausible theory to explain them. So it is often described as inference to the best explanation. So what we do when we are doing abductive reasoning is we start with some unexpected observation, that is we are collecting data for some other kind of research and we find some other results. So formulate a hypothesis that could explain that observation. We test that hypothesis by gathering data and then we can refine that hypothesis based on further data. So it's more like a iterative approach. An example could be a retail store notices that there is a significant drop in sales during certain hours of the day, which is very unusual. So they hypothesize that drop in sale is due to a recent change in store layout that makes it difficult to find products. The researchers can either collect a qualitative data, quantitative data. In that case, the researcher observes that customer behave in the store and conducts interviews to understand the shopping experiences. So based on that data, the researcher finds that customers are indeed having a trouble, navigating the new layout of the store, which leads to a fewer purchase. So this kind of reasoning is actually mostly used in case studies or mixed method research, where the researcher needs to make a sense of incomplete or puzzling data. So this slide compares between deductive, inductive and abductive reasoning with their process, with their examples. As we will learn further in our research methodology course, these different research philosophies leads to different research designs. And it's very important to align our methodology with our philosophical stance. For example, a positivist approach might use surveys because they want to collect data that is more unbiased, realistic numerical data. An interpretivist might use interviews to explore leadership perception because they want to explore in depth and they are more concerned about the the reality that is in depth reality, or the nature of the data is more subjective in that case. So it's important that there is a consistency between the theory development and the data collection and the research methods that we adopt. This chapter concludes with the key point that there is no single best research philosophy. Each has its own strengths and limitations. A researcher must be equipped with the knowledge of all kind of research philosophies, and choosing the right philosophy can help create credible and meaningful research, and the researcher should be able to reflect upon and they should align their philosophy with their research design.